Appreciate that. So this is our first opportunity to engage with the board and seek feedback from the board, and we deeply appreciate it. And I would have you know today you'll hear from not only myself, Mr. Gollihue, Mr. Chambers, and we're really happy to have our COO here today with us. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Burkhart. But this really involved work of the entire administrative team, including in the room, Deb Klein, Amy Randolph, and a lot from Dan Hoeing, Julia Indelatio. So we appreciate all of their hard work and their hard time. And I do think you'll see why we really need 10 hours. So this really is about the district's sustainability and growth. And I will say it's no commentary at all on any individual school or everything that they bring to the table. We took a holistic, hold apart look at this and want everyone to know who participated in every engagement session or any sharing of data. We deeply appreciate it. The work comes out of the ad hoc work that took place over an 18-month period of time, in addition to conversations that have been held at the board level. And what we've done with that work is take a look at our current programming, future programming, our building utilization, as well as our neighborhoods. We looked into the plans that the city has for the Cincinnati area. We looked at what's going on in urban education across the state and across the country. And we thought deeply about the future, not only of our school district, but our city and of the demands that are being made on our young people. So what you will see on actually the next slide is some of those specific areas. We really honed in on this corridor model concept, looking at the west side, central corridor, and an east side. And you'll also see some reference to north and south of the city. We think this approach will give a lens that will help us with some of the things that we've been tackling these first few months across the city as well. So then on the next slide, just want to bring you back to phase 1 and before. The board did take action quite some time ago to remove magnet statuses such as Paideia College Prep from schools like Covedale, Silverton, and Mount Washington. And so that is work that we have ensured will be in place for fiscal year 25. Again, I'll mention the 18 months of the ad hoc work resulting in 5 directives and 10 action items. When we get to the conclusion of this presentation, we hope to be able to put a bow on those 5 directives and 10 action items that were passed by the board on March the 18th. We celebrate the completion of the renovations at Hyde Park School, Walnut Hills, and Pleasant Ridge Montessori for the start of this school year 24-25. We also, over the spring and into the summer, starting in August on time, the relocation of Spencer and the merger of Riverview East Academy with the pre-K to 8th grade students going to Mount Washington. Additional things we considered on the next slide. I mentioned earlier city planning, including our Winton Terrace area, Millvale area, West End area. We looked at our recreation centers and the proximity to our schools and the current partnerships that we have with those recreation centers. We also considered some legislation that you're fully aware of that is in conversation at the state level that looks at building utilization for school districts. In particular, we call out underutilization. And there is a tab in your presentation that lists the schools with the nearest recreation center. Rob, if you just click on that so they can see that exist in some of the research that we've done. So we've included our schools, the school address, what rec center, and the rec center address. We go back to the main body of the presentation. In our public engagement with, first we started one-to-one with principals, then we went to LSDMCs, and we're continuing to expand to community conversations. We started our earliest conversations in September, and our last conversation was as late as yesterday afternoon, which caused some of the delay in getting this presentation into your hands. We wanted to be sure that we heard and considered as many schools and LSDMCs as possible. So you see listed there some of the common themes that came out of those conversations. And I would tell you that none of them are a surprise to me. Everyone is extremely proud of their school, as we are proud of their school too. On the next page, you'll see continuation of a listing of common concerns in terms of when we met with LSDMCs, when we met with parent groups, concern about the programming that they currently offer, concerns about specialized units, concerned about how can they get to an enrollment level where the building utilization is where the state feels it should be. And then there have been some, we've already started on the next slide, conversations. Those are the parent conversations and some of the broad general concerns that they came up with. And then on the next slide, the start of the community councils. We are not done with these conversations, but these are some of the top priorities to date in terms of looking at siblings, looking at what housing looks like, looking at the resources that are in different communities for schools and for kids to utilize. On the next slide, I will toss it to Jeremy Gollihue.
Thank you, Superintendent Murphy. So constructing a growth plan is a lot like working on a really complicated puzzle, but it's way more exciting because all the pieces can fit together in a lot of different ways. It's not like one solution is the only solution. And it really builds, more excitement when you realize all the opportunities and exciting services that we can really bring to our families as we dig in, both with the corridor model and deeper. We start looking at the community groupings of schools within those corridors and how our kids move across. So the first area we were looking at relates to the grade bands, healthy enrollment, and the matriculation of our students between not just within a building, but between the buildings inside of those corridors. The first thing was setting, a goal and a definition for us in terms of what is a healthy enrollment number, considering effective class sizes, the cost per student ratio of the school, the number of services, and the elevated level of the service that can be supported by that population. Really 80% would be perfect, right? That's where we would like to see every school. Realistically, we're not going to be at a single number, but a range. So our goal was between 70 and 90% utilization. The factors that go into that when we start breaking down the individual enrollments by grades and schools included a lot of things. And this is by no means an exhaustive list because it includes so many variables and of course, so many different versions. But this is a pretty solid example of what creates the foundation of that analysis. That includes where students live versus where they attend schools today. Census and population data, both for the city, the region, and our neighborhoods. A lot of supplemental information from third parties that they have publicly available in terms of what the demographics look like, what the future demographics of our neighborhoods look like, that are available both publicly and privately. The proximity of our schools to each other. We do have significant areas in the city where we have a whole lot of schools in geographic proximity and others where we don't, right? So that creates part of the puzzle. We looked at our building capacities as they stand today and what the opportunities were for changing those capacities where possible. We looked at the flow of the students within and across those buildings, as well as, and of course, the current enrollment and the past, current, and future enrollment trends. Next slide. Speaking to enrollment specifically, there is some realities that we face looking at post-COVID and what our enrollment has been across the district, right? So I think this gives a pretty good trend that you can see in terms of the enrollment across the district, dating all the way back to 2002 and 2003. But I think the next slide really provides us a better view into looking at in COVID, where we saw our most significant drop, right? It was a very sudden shift. And that really turned a trend for CPS as a whole into a different perspective. We did recover slightly, but we maintained a net loss in reality. And in the last 2 years, we've seen that downward trend, unfortunately, continue. So this had to factor into the calculations and analysis we were doing but it also doesn't just highlight a need for consolidation or closing anything or those kind of options that people immediately respond to when they see those numbers. What it really calls for is acknowledging and seeing the future of Cincinnati and the population projections we see here. So really, Cincinnati has been seeing and experiencing a year-over-year population increase, which is actually pretty unique for the urban areas in Ohio. We have a different trajectory than most, and it's widely accepted that depending on the model you look at, we're expected to see an increase between 200 and 600,000 people by 2050. So looking at those numbers, looking at our neighborhoods and the demographics, we can back that out and look to see what those projections and the models look like for school age children, looking at our market share both today and what we project we can accomplish and capture in the future with different services and marketing to see what portion of that should be coming into CPS. So what this really shows is the message of what do we need to do to capture that increase in Cincinnati within the district. Okay, next slide. So starting that analysis within the corridors, like I said, we tried to segment the schools or put them into community groups that really represented the direct impact that potential grade band changes would have together. That doesn't mean that it's isolated, right? So each school, every change impacts another chain or another link down the chain. But we tried to put them into logical groups that make sense and were understandable together as to what the direct impacts would be. Given this is our first one, I want to go through just a little bit of kind of like what you see on the slide. We'll come back to the content a little bit, but just what's available for each of these. So first, you'll see the community grouping, in this case, Western Hills, Ethel Taylor, Roll Hill, and Leap. You'll see that each one of these slides will have a data sheet associated to it that we'll go into in just a second, a summary as to what the potential changes that we've looked at and analyzed that we think are really the best thinking around how those puzzle pieces could fit. And then, of course, a link for the engagement plan that shows the calendar that has what engagement has already been completed, as well as what's scheduled going forward for that particular group of schools. Okay, we click on the data sheet. So we'll look at this one first as an example. And I know this is a lot of data, so I'm going to try and step through it as cleanly as I can, and hopefully I can get everybody on the same page. What you'll see on each of these data sheets really represents a 5-year view of that group of schools. The first block will be FY25. That's current. That's this year. Then you'll see FY26, 27, 28, and 29. Each of those blocks represent what we would see as the matriculation of those students between grades as they go and in reflection of the changes that could be made there. So in the first block on this one, for example, you see Ethel Taylor in column T under total. That would be their total enrollment. When this work started was around mid-September, so a lot of these numbers are reflective of that, which are pretty stable. Roll Hill was 406. Western Hills was 1,403. The next column you see is the capacity rating of that building, followed by the number of seats that are either over or under that capacity. And then in the final column there, W is utilization. That's the one we'll really be spending a lot of time talking about today. That utilization number, and that's where we said earlier that we're looking at a goal, range between 70 and 90%. So as you can see here right off the bat, we have two schools, Ethel Taylor and Roll Hill, where the utilization is pretty low compared to where that goal and range we want to see them at. So we started looking across these schools and wanted to figure out how do we create a matriculation pathway for those students that better utilizes the capacity across those buildings and offers better services and opportunities for the students going through those schools. So looking under FY26, the second block, you'll see that we have Ethel Taylor is now one of the changes that we're considering would be to make Ethel Taylor a West Side Junior High, a 7th and 8th grade program. The yellow blocks represents the grade levels that would be leaving that building and now going to Roll Hill. So Roll Hill would represent the elementary school for the area between Roll Hill, Cumminsville, Millville, South and North Fairmount, and Camp Washington area. They would be the elementary school. Ethel Taylor would be the junior high, which would also allow the West High's 7th and 8th grade students to have an opportunity and an option to go to that's not at the high school. So this accomplishes a number of things, right? So we can see first, Ethel Taylor's new enrollment, the utilization will be around 61%. Still kind of low for where we want it to be. We'll come back to that in just a second. but that moves Roll Hill up into the 91%, which is a little high from where we want to be. You'll see if you look at each of these schools, the transition year, FY26, sometimes FY27, because we are moving the population of students between schools in a group, you'll see a little spike in those years typically, because we're moving an existing cohort as opposed to what would naturally matriculate there. So you'll see a small spike there, but then as we look further down, you'll see that they stabilize into the areas that we're wanting to see them long term. Then West High, which is one of our big goals, is to relieve some of the crowding we have at our high schools. Ultimately, when we look at our utilization chart of which schools have the highest utilization across the district, our high schools are our biggest problem areas. So immediately we've relieved some of the pressure at West High. Now, the next part you'll notice in here and on some of the slide, on some of these data sheets, you'll see is that red area where it says lottery seats. So going back to Ethel Taylor, that 61%, what that really means is that means we have additional seats available at that junior high that we can offer to the West corridor in the form of a lottery seat. So it's the same as our 7th grade lottery, right? So in addition to the 275 students that we would project there immediately, if we look at FY27, we would have the 6th grade class matriculating from Roll Hill to Ethel Taylor. We would have those seats available for them to choose if they wanted to take them or not. And then we would have a collection of lottery seats for the normal 7th grade lottery. Combining the two, we can bring that population or the enrollment and utilization up to, as you see here, if we maxed the number of lottery seats, we could go as high as 98%. But we ultimately can control that lottery capacity as we move forward to situate the enrollment utilization where we need it to be. So we could lower that a little bit in the first year to bring that down on that spike and then bring it back up to the next year where it would be a stable 150 going forward. Sorry. So
I was wondering, when are we gonna get the question?
let me,
You gonna get a lot. I'm just. Okay, keep going.
okay. So that is a commonality you'll see, and we won't necessarily go through the data sheets on all of these. We can always revisit those and look at them as we want, but we wanted to give an example of what it looks like and what the information you can find there. So if you go back to the main slides, Rob. Thank you, sir. So now if you take all of that information, look through that data as we see the matriculation of the grades, the students through that pattern, ultimately this summarizes what the recommendation or the best thinking we would have in terms of how to fit those schools into the more efficient and really maximizing the opportunities for our students in that area would be for West High to become a 9-12 with their 7th and 8th grade program going to Ethel Taylor. Ethel Taylor's current elementary program going to Roll Hill. So it becomes the elementary for the area. Ethel Taylor then becoming the 7th and 8th junior high. And as a small note to the side, Leap Academy is also in this area. You didn't see it directly reflected on the others because it's not necessarily the same student body, but we also are looking at Leap Academy becoming a 7th and 8th, expanding from a pre-K 6 to a pre-K 8. So that really allows those students to matriculate for an additional 2 years and having that dual language experience that we're building at Leap. Okay. And then of course, the last part, Rob, if you'll click on the engagement plan. Or maybe not. Fixing that on the fly real fast. Let's see how fast I can do this. Y'all can laugh while I'm doing it. It's okay. See, we're good. Refresh. We're fast like that. All right. So on the engagement link, you can see for each slide, like I said earlier, the calendar in terms of what engagement sessions have already been had for LSDMC parents, community councils where applicable, as well as a link to the individual notes. Don't click those. And for each of those sessions that have been gathered by Mr. Chambers. Okay, and go back to the main slide. So again, that's a summary as to what you'll see on the slide, as well as, that particular community grouping. So then to the next one, our next grouping is Hayes Porter and Rothenberg. So really, this is a little different story that we're looking at specifically. Again, how these puzzle pieces fit. You're going to hear me say that a lot today. I think I'm moving from the bridge guy to the puzzle guy. So that's growth. What we're really looking at from Rothenberg and Hayes is looking at the opportunity of bringing our Montessori seats and school system to the central corridor as we have it now. Right now, we have it on the east and the west. So at Rothenberg, we've considered what it would look like if we were to start a matriculation growth of Rothenberg into a Montessori program, meaning next year their preschool would be a Montessori preschool. And then the year after that would become preschool, kindergarten, first grade, et cetera, by year, growing one grade by year. What that really creates is a system here. It's almost similar to what we have at Pleasant Ridge Montessori as our first neighborhood Montessori. This would be very much like a neighborhood Montessori for this particular area. The opportunity then would be for anybody not looking for the non-Montessori experience after the matriculation complete, you would have Hayes available as the new neighborhood school for both areas. In addition to the matriculation to build that starting of the Montessori system in the central area, Hayes would go from a pre-K 6 to a pre-K 5, and their sixth grade would then become a matriculation pathway directly to our first middle school we'll discuss today, which is at South Avondale. And we'll see additional details as we go through the next two groupings, because there's really a story behind South Avondale that builds not just from one school or two schools, but a handful of schools all in that area, again, because this area represents, as we kind of mentioned earlier, an area where we have a large number of schools in very close proximity. All right, next slide. So to continue that same area, we're looking at Withrow, Evanston, and Frederick Douglass. Within this particular grouping, we are considering merging the Evanston and Frederick Douglass elementary programs into the Douglass building. So you would have the pre-K through 5 program there. And then from that collected elementary program, the sixth grade would again be a direct matriculation pathway to South Avondale for a middle school. Evanston would then become the 7th and 8th junior high as an IB program feeding directly into the Withrow IB program that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then one last thing, sorry. As one alternative option in this area, and again, those puzzle pieces, right, is looking at it from Evanston could also become the pre-K 5, where Douglass would then, as the larger building, become the junior high for Walnut as opposed to Withrow. Now, the Walnut 7th and 8th grade population is much larger than that at Withrow currently. So it does create some constrictions or constraints at the building due to the capacity and the size, but that is an alternative option that we could look at. Now the next slide. And the final grouping, again, that kind of builds that conglomerate for South Avondale is looking at changing the Hughes STEM program to be a 9-12, our Woodward Career Tech to a 9-12, and Rockdale Academy becoming the K-5 elementary program, joining Rockdale and the South Avondale elementary programs, leaving South Avondale again as that middle school program for that part of the city for Frederick Douglass, Rockdale, and Hayes Porter. Okay. And next, I will hand it back to our superintendent.
Thank you. So on the next slide, you see our view at Rising Stars at Vine and Taft Elementary. And our best thinking with those buildings are to consider William H. Taft Elementary for a pre-K to 6 building. Those pre-K students would be coming from the Rising Star at Vine campus. And then we would have the Rising Star at Vine campus be able to be used for wraparound services for our community at large. And so we affectionately have been calling that in our planning the WRAP. And what we mean by that is, we currently have our Project Connect student programming there, where they have opportunity to access clothing, food pantry, school uniforms, supplies. We want to be able to expand those services. We're considering things like a laundromat. We've had conversations with Hamilton County Job and Family Services about being able to utilize their services on site, at least a portion of the week. And so we thought that could be a premier location for services to grow across our district for our families. On the next slide, Sailor Park is a very interesting building. We have been losing some of those students to schools outside of our district. And so we put thinking around how can we maintain those students and those families. So we are suggesting your consideration for Sailor Park becoming a pre-K to 12 building where we would add programming, stepping out a grade level at a time. So next school year, we would add grade 9. And the following year, those kids would continue on as grade 10, et cetera. We're looking at adding some military junior ROTC component and are in conversations currently around the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, for example. We're also interested in implementing an early college program at Sailor Park, and looking at partnerships with Mount St. Joe, a very close proximity to the school. We do understand that it would be a smaller school, so we're looking at possible athletic and extracurricular combination opportunities with another pre-K to 12 building in our district, Euler. Aiken, Pleasant Hill, Winton Hills, and College Hill. We are proposing to you that Aiken be considered for the next school year as a 9 to 12 building, with the 7th and 8th grade students moving to Pleasant Hill. Pleasant Hill Academy becoming a 6 through 8 building, converting to a middle school, with the pre-K to 5 who are currently in that building going to College Hill. College Hill, losing its magnet status, would be a neighborhood school that's grades pre-K to 5. Winton Hills Academy is very interesting school because there are kind of neighborhoods within the neighborhood there. And we have kids going not only to Winton Hills Academy, we have some going to Mount Airy, some going to Pleasant Hill. And we would like the kids to be able to walk to their neighborhood school. And so we are proposing Winton Hills Academy as a pre-K to 5 building. No change in Mount Airy, but just a shifting of some students who we have been sending there out of neighborhood to have the opportunity to be within their neighborhood. On the next slide, Clark, Silverton, Woodford, and John P. Parker. The proposal is that 7th and 8th grade students from Clark Montessori would go to Woodford Academy, making Clark Montessori a 9 through 12 high school. The Woodford Academy students would lose their magnet status, would not be a part of the lottery, and we would convert that building again to a Montessori building. Silverton Elementary would remain a K to 6 building with no magnet status, but they would absorb the neighborhood students from Woodford, about 37 children, into their building. We are proposing no change at John P. Parker, but we are looking at that Kennedy Heights boundary that would move some of those kids into Silverton for enrollment. Hartwell Rising Stars at Carthage and Bond Hill Academy. We're suggesting Hartwell School become a school, middle school of grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 with a welcome center in the north part of our city. We would then move students in grades 2 to 4 to Carthage, having that become a kindergarten through 4th grade building. The preschool students who are currently at Carthage would move to Bond Hill Academy, making that a preschool through 6th grade building. And then we go and take a look at Carson.
So at Carson, it's a little different scenario than what we're looking at. I think most of you are familiar. We've heard over the past 2 years really about the severe crowding issues at Carson and some things we've done to try and stopgap and increase and give some relief there. So the first step is very similar here that we could propose and look at would be changing the boundary lines within between Carson and Reese Price. So if we were to shift the Reese Price attendance boundary to the west, specifically along Beach Avenue, to include both sides of the road is key, because there's usually a distinction that always kind of is questionable there, right? So we would include both sides of Beach Avenue as the new boundary for Reese Price. That would shift about 75 students, specifically between kindergarten and 5th grade. So our 6th graders at Carson are going to be matriculating out to a 7th grade program. So we really wanted to make sure that the impact of any change were students that were going to be there for a little bit longer period of time. So that gives us a little more breathing room. So I'd also like to take a look at the data sheet on this one again, because it is a little different scenario. And, as we've talked about the puzzle pieces, that, there is a goal of that 70 to 90%, but it's not realistically that we can hit it at every single opportunity in this one change, right? So with Carson and Reese Price, I think it's real important to call out that with this change, we can shift that utilization from Carson up to 106% in year one down to 101%, bumping Reese Price up to a 96%. So both of those are still going to be relatively high. And as we continue to look at progressing years, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down, Rob, a little bit, we can see that if the trend for the Carson area and the Price Hill area continues as we see it now and is projected to, that area is going to continue to have crowding issues. There's going to be more additional kids coming there. So just by shifting this line the single time is not going to completely resolve that problem, but it helps get us the breathing room to make additional changes in the future as we look to what we'll call affectionately later the phase 2 and beyond part, where we need some more opportunities for that area, especially on the west side of town, in addition to the changes we've talked about today. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at, we've went through all of the community groupings of schools that we've looked at in detail individually, but the next section will give kind of an overview now as to what each corridor would look like and how the students would flow through it. So if we were to implement all of these changes, you would see in the East Corridor, we now have pre-K or K-6 schools, including Silverton, John P. Parker, Frederick Douglass, Kilgore, and Hyde Park. The color coding is really what stands out, though. So you can see Silverton and John P. Parker having a yellow color coding matching to Schroeder gives you an idea as to where we would expect the matriculation pathway of those students to flow through the corridor. So John P. Parker and Silverton, we would see programmatically going through for Schroeder Middle School. Frederick Douglass is the one exception we have to the cross corridor that we were trying to avoid. With Frederick Douglass, it would be feeding into the central corridor's South Avondale Middle School. But it's the only one we have that does fit that situation, unfortunately. Evanston, you can see, is in a standalone color representing it does have a change, would become a 7 and 8 junior high, essentially a East Corridor junior high, wide junior high. The high schools you can see in gray, Withrow and Schroeder, becoming a 9-12, Schroeder, of course, continuing from this year. And then followed by what would be the pre-K-8 and the Montessori programs system on that east side, including the North Avondale, Pleasant Ridge, and Sands, same as we have now. The new and first Montessori Middle School, or junior high, I'm sorry, at Woodford, and then Clark Montessori for the high school 9 to 12. Next. For the central corridor, again, just repeating those patterns, like I said, to help be able to visualize what the corridor looks like now from the grade band distribution. You can look at these and see how they compare across each corridor, and the color coding will help you follow, like I said, the matriculation pathways we see being supported by those students. The biggest change to call out that's not reflective on any of the individual community groups is both the central corridor and the west corridor. If you want to flip, you'll see do maintain a single option for a 7 to 12 high school. So during this transition phase, we have to have enough 7th grade seats for all the students coming from a 6th grade in those corridors. To be able to support that, we would need to maintain at Dater for the West and Taft for the Central, a single 7 through 12 opportunity for those additional seats. Okay. Next slide. And of course, that leaves our district-wide programs, which are not captured in the corridor model necessarily directly, but that for our qualifying entrants, that would be SCPA, Walnut, and Spencer. Within our digital, online, and alternative programs, we have Virtual High School and Gilligan Digital, which are currently under review for a redesign, which you'll hear a little bit more about again later. The Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning, and then, of course, our new premier services at the RAP at Vine. Okay, one more. And these slides, the next three, I wanted to provide as a visualization now, because one of the aspects that we've talked about coming out of ad hoc and as we've done through this work is trying to get equitable access to programming and services across those corridors. So this gives us a good model to see, like here, you can see we have an early learning center, a dedicated preschool offering in each of the corridors. Bramble, Rising Stars at Ezra Charles, and Rising Stars at Chevy at Westwood, one in each corridor. The next slide shows very similar for our welcome centers, where we've traditionally had one on east side and west side. We are looking at offering additional welcome centers and expanded capacity at the current welcome centers at Dater and Withrow to expand those offerings on the east and west, and also at Hartwell now to capture the central corridor and really bring services to where we see a ever increasing population of immigrant and Hispanic students in that area. And we want to be able to make sure we're offering services to as well. One more. And the last showing, of course, again, the parity for our corridors for the programming at the grade bands we see in yellow, the Montessori junior highs that we were looking at in orange, the junior highs. You can see one in each east and west of both of those, as well as Evanston for the lower central, and then the 3 middle schools at South Avondale, Pleasant Hill, and Hartwell. Next slide. And with that, like I said, it's one piece of the puzzle, right? That's those grade bands, the enrollment, and the matriculation of the students. And I think I said this in our last presentation, but it's equally as important on the other side of that coin, if not more so, are the programmatic changes, the focuses, and the services that we can offer at our buildings that really reinforce not just where we want the kids to go from a grade standpoint, but where we need them to go to be able to increase student outcomes and better services for our families and students. So to cover the programmatic focus proposals and other changes, Mr. Chambers.
Thank you. Looking at our programmatic focuses that we're proposing, we're looking at international baccalaureate programs at Roberts and Gilbert A. Dater High School, and that will be in the West Corridor. And to for equity purposes and pathways from middle schools to high schools, we're proposing the IB programs at AWL, Evanston, and Withrow. Also at Withrow, we were looking to add a public safety program. And at Frederick Douglass or Chase Elementary, we're looking to add a premier medically fragile autism services. And, with this program, we would like to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our most medically fragile students. And this would be an option for those parents to have their students enrolled in a facility that would give them, premier top-notch first-class services. And the Zoo Academy, we're looking to expand access to the Zoo Academy district-wide. And Rob, if you can click on that link, please. And this will give you an idea of, the process that, we have undertaken to make sure that the Zoo Academy is open for district-wide enrollment for next school year. Back to the main slide, please. And at Woodward High School, we're looking to add automotive, cosmetology, and entrepreneurship programs. And at Sailor Park, which was mentioned earlier, we're looking to add early college programs. That would be for the West Corridor, and that would be in addition to the early college that we have at Schroeder. Next slide, please. And at Sailor Park, we're looking to add the Navy, Air Force, or Coast Guard, JROTC. And at Pleasant Hill, a humanities and social science program. And with the that humanities and social science program, excuse me, Rob, we're looking to partner with the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center. And the program would empower the students to through experiential learning and community engagement and advocacy. So, that would give our students an opportunity to, have a program that emphasizes community, belonging and identity. So we want to make sure that our students have the top-notch experiences with these programs that we're offering. Next slide, please. The Gilligan Digital Academy and Virtual High School. This is currently in review by the district team, and the areas of review are enrollment and attendance, compliance, curriculum, and programming. And there's a staffing review this being undertaken. So to talk a little bit about the middle school, and the junior high, programming and sports options. Schroeder Middle School, will have a career tech exploratory, focus. South Avondale Middle School will have, foundations of IT. Pleasant Hill Middle School, as I said before, will have the social sciences focus. Hartwell Middle School, health science and technology. Ethel Taylor would have arts and communication. Evanston Junior High will have a fundamentals of business, which would, feed into, Withrow's business program. And Woodford and Gamble Montessori will have their, Montessori focuses. And we also did a really deep dive into looking at the facilities and if the junior high proposed campuses can support sports and other athletics and extracurriculars. At Schroeder, they currently share the athletic facilities with the high school. At South Avondale, the campus can support both indoor and outdoor sports. At Pleasant Hill, the campus can also support indoor and outdoor sports. At Hartwell, they currently have the facility used for indoor. They have the capacity for that, but they currently do their outdoor sports at the Hartwell Recreation Center. They currently have soccer and flag football. So that's currently being used for that. Ethel Taylor, the campus can be used for indoor, but there's a possibility for Millville Rec for outdoor activities. Evanston, the campus can be used for indoor, and the Owl's Nest Park for the outdoor sports. And at Woodford, we're looking to for partners to provide us facilities for athletic events at Woodford. And Gamble Montessori Middle will share the facilities with the high school. And the other changes that we have researched, the Dr. Odell Owens Center for Learning would add Strides classrooms. Gilbert A. Dater would create a welcome center, and we've identified 2 rooms. One would be used for the welcome center, and one for a pantry. And at Silverton, the end of the 2-year legacy magnet transportation. And at the School for Creative and Performing Arts, we're looking to have 1 start time for the kindergarten through 12th grade. And we're also looking at centralized enrollment. And with centralized enrollment, we'll have a one-stop shop for our parents for enrolling their students in our district. With the Department of Student Services, ESL, Project Connect, we will have all of those groups here at central office. So as the parents come to enroll, it's a one-stop, and they can have access to all of the services that we offer here in Cincinnati Public. And this is, different from some of the work that we used to do when the parents had to go to the school, and then they may have to go to another school and they're told to come to central office. We want to eliminate that with the process where we'll centralize our enrollment, and that would remove all the barriers for the parents to enroll into our schools.
So one additional area that we dug pretty deep into and we're really excited about is our specialized units. So it's something that we've talked about for a period of time now, in terms of what we've experienced is students right now may have the need for a unit, but the most local unit or closest one to them is full. So then they have to look at where can that student be placed from school A, no, school B, no. And they end up having to go further away than what we would really like for that family to have to support for that student. So in our analysis of that, we looked again where the students live compared to where the units are located, with an effort to try and figure out how we maintain a more local assignment for those students. We looked at the alignment with the potential new building capacities in light of all of the other changes that we've talked about, as well as reducing or minimizing the transportation impact, the travel time, and the costs, right? So there's a little bit of a reflection that we do in terms of this and looking at The practices currently, and what's been happening for essentially the past 20 years, is kind of what I described, where the target is to place a student or to be able to give student services as close as possible to where they live. Absolutely the right way to do it, right? But over the 20-year period that we've been doing that, continuously the students have had to be placed further and further away, because you can look at a simple example of like a 4 to 6 grade unit. There may have a abundance of 6th grade students. That unit is full. Incoming 4th grade student then has to go to further away. When those 6th grade students matriculate out, you don't want to move that 4th grade back. So we have to have a little bit more of a holistic approach. And how do we kind of recover again from that 20-year practice? And it's not that we need to change the practice as much as we just need to look at how do we reset it more effectively on a regular basis and not looking over that period of time. So we are looking also next year at relocating the units in alignment with the new capacities for the buildings, as well as doing a student reset, essentially kind of taking the slate, looking at where those students are, the ones that can be reassigned to a closer unit. It's more convenient for them and their family on a holistic approach across the district. Could you go back to the data sheets for a second? So for the eagle-eyed, may have noticed one thing on the data sheets that I didn't address earlier that I was waiting to hear. Yeah, you may have to go back up. Sorry. A little bit further. There you go. Any of them are fine. Scroll over to the right. So what you'll see, in addition to what we covered earlier on each of these, is a section at the end that identifies the specialized units that are currently at the school, both MD units and AU units, as well as any STRIDES units at the school. As you look through these, the first block will again represent where the current units are at. The second block will now represent where we are recommending or where we're considering those units could be moved to maximize the number of students that we can provide services to, again, as close to where they live as possible. And then in addition to working through the process of realigning those students to where now we have the capacity for those students, we're bringing a more efficient service and a better level of convenience to our families. Okay. Next slide. Yeah. Go until you see orange. There you go. Back. All right, great. So this kind of represents closing out the phase 2 part before we go into the beyond part. This is looking at what our implementation timeline would be for phase 2 going forward. So on the left in the small little print you see today, that's where we start. However, you can note the engagement obviously started well before today and will continue going throughout for the next several months as we continue the program. A couple of specific call outs that'll happen, basically immediately following this for this week is the directors meeting to kind of give them the overview of what we looked at today, bring everybody onto the same page, try and help get people into understanding what is being discussed and why. Following that will be the principal meeting for the same purpose. And then immediately beginning in November, we would be looking at our lotteries starting. And obviously the impact of this would be significant against what our lotteries would look like, as now students have new matriculation pathways and new opportunities for their lottery choices. Throughout November and December, we would really want to ratchet up our marketing to start notifying families and get some understanding as to what the proposals are, as well as start holding our departmental meetings. So we bring all of our departments on board and start building out the real plans, not just the theories, not just the ideas, but what is the practical, how do we make this happen, right? And then that carries through to January and February, where staffing rounds will start and we can see the impacts it has on the staff at school. But more importantly, we start our implementation meetings. And those really are the all hands on deck meetings where we pull in, the principal, school representatives of every department, and we get everybody at the table and start putting through the actual project plan of what does this take, what has to be moved from benches, tables, chairs, classrooms, how are teachers going to move, those real detailed level. So that would start at the beginning of the year and carry ultimately through the summer, where we would also start June 25th with our physical moves starting, carrying through to finally when school opens in August of 2025. So the big picture here is what we're looking at from these overall changes and what we've talked about today would be and could be implemented by school opening of August 2025. Next slide. So now we move from phase 2 to that beyond. And for that, I will hand it over to Mr. Burkhart.
So thank you. So we're not only excited about phase two, but we're really excited about the beyond part of phase two. And so in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what does phase two look like in operational aspects, as well as what should we consider for the years beyond that. Now, in an ideal situation, we would build things before we need them, and we wouldn't be in a situation where we have schools that are over capacity, and then we're trying to struggle to figure out what to do in that situation. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about what does the best thinking look like moving forward as we consider putting phase two into operation. As Mr. Gullahue said, we're looking at 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So this thinking is really talking about what might that look like moving forward. So the first piece is looking at our assets that we have that we could sell or land swap with the city. And so we have a swap of land or a plot of land at Burton and Digby that are currently not being utilized. By putting everything on the table here, we put the education center in Iowa. The current net worth of this building and the assets is approximately 6.5 million, as well as Iowa at $2 million. So again, we're not saying that this needs to happen right away. We're just putting all of our assets out so that we can have a larger discussion in relation to them. Another asset that we have is the jewel of Hughes is the Hughes Annex, which is currently vacant. It does need a renovation. It would provide us approximately 40 classrooms. The estimated cost for that is about $20 million, but that does not include any mitigations that we may have to do to that the building. We would look at that as a central corridor, a Montessori high school, to be able to stand up the Montessori program. That would also allow us, if we were to start working on that soon, would allow us time that as those students from Rothenberg start to matriculate out of Rothenberg, would then give us the opportunity to have them come into Hughes Annex as that central corridor school. Hands is a unique situation. As I said earlier, we like to build it before we need to. Hands, although is over capacity and is splitting at the seams. So this is one of those situations that we need both a short-term and long-term plan. The short-term plan would be consider an agreement with the recreation center for some shared use space, and utilizing some of those spaces that might not be utilized in the recreation center throughout the school day so that we can provide some relief to cans. Long-term, also consider redesign of the rec center as an addition to cans and what parts can we use in the long term, as well as looking at both the recreational center and cans. How do we look at that entire plot of land and make a school and recreational center that meet the needs of the community? And so that is a bigger conversation, as well as it may be a situation where we add to the recreational center and add 2 cans in that plot of land at the same time. Next slide. Gamble Montessori High School has a lot of untapped potential. We're looking at possibly putting a West Corridor Montessori Middle School that would attach to the current gym annex, affectionately known as the Swamp right now. Many of us know that the school is again a gem in the city, and we think that there's a lot of untapped potential from the aspect of we have plenty of space to grow. We have plenty of room off the back of the school to add additions / renovations, and would also give the Montessori concept in that West Corridor the ability to grow even further than it already has. Jacobs Center. So Jacobs Center is sadly not a jewel in our portfolio, as I think everyone recognizes. But think and envision with me for a second that if that land were to be transformed into a mega structure to include the offices or educational service offices that are currently here on Burnett, but also having meeting rooms inclusive of all of the meeting rooms here, as well as a new Iowa Center. So a new center that would house facilities, would house student dining. There would be a new cook chill kitchen, an expanded central kitchen over there as well. And then adding district-wide warehousing and distribution. We always know that it's really, really tough, that we have really no storage space in our district, and being forward thinking about what does that look like so that we can have a one-stop hub. The next part of that is really exciting to me, is both expansion of the district van service to then develop into in-house busing. So this is a decade or decade and a half endeavor to bring transportation in-house. And this would provide us a facility, ability to put a bus garage and those services associated with that, as well as can we put some classroom space into our facilities area that we can both collaborate with CTE. So students who are actually in CTE programs can actually see boots on the ground and learn how those operations work and have those be part of classroom experience together with the actual inner workings of facilities. And I think that's in any school district, if you're looking at CTE programs, you're looking at how do students get real world examples and real world experience as they're going to school. And this would be able to mirror both of those together seamlessly in one operation. So we're really excited about that. So Heinold property, which was Heinold Junior High or Middle School years ago, has been leveled. And so we're left with a large property on the west side. That would be a new West Side High School. If given the opportunity, the cost would roughly be $7 to $100 million or more, depending on what kind of athletic facilities and how large we want to build that. But it's a prime location for us to build out and give our high schools some relief. Again, as we talk through some of these, I'm looking at 3 to 5 years minimum before we stand up these types of programs. So as we look at the growth plan and start to make it operational, we would start to make these operational as well, knowing that it would be 5 years down the road before we actually have usable space in these situations. So let's talk also about building additions. So as we talk through the phase 2 and the plans and the corridors, as well as the groupings of schools that correspond with each, we start looking at where do we think that we are going to need space in the future. Again, Walnut Hill is a gem in our district. We know that we have added onto Walnut and added onto Walnut. We are almost to the point where we don't have any more usable space to add on at Walnut. But we would consider a land swap. If you look at the map, there's a green space in front of Walnut called Hoyes Field, and that is actually owned by the city. So as I talked about some of the properties that we have currently, this may be a situation that we do a land swap with our current property with this other property the city owns that probably will not be developed in the future. So our idea would be to develop a building on this property that would allow us to have additional expansion of Walnut and be able to actually have a corridor that would just be a hallway that will connect the new structure with the old. Winton Hills Academy, as we talked earlier, we really want to be able to have those students who live in the Winton Hills neighborhoods who can see their school. They want to be able to walk to that school. But right now, there's not enough space for us to do that. As you can look at the map, there's plenty of space around the school that would be right for us to do an addition that we could expand the capacity of the school and provide those students who are actually in that neighborhood to be able to go to the school. As we talk about Sailor Park and Sailor Park being transitioned to a K-12 school, we want to make sure that students have a proper K-12 experience at that site. And right now it'd be really cramped to be able to provide that. as we look at adding grades every year, we're, looking at down the road, how do we envision Sailor Park to be a premier school on the far west side, as well as give those students the high school experience they want by also standing up the ROTC programs and early college programs. There's some adjacent property to Sailor Park that we would have to look at the feasibility. But again, Sailor Park would be one that we are looking at for expansion. So with that, those are the best thinking behind what we are looking at in kind of years 3 through 5 on what we should get started on now to be able to provide not only relief to the district, but also growth to the district. Again, we want to build these before we need them and have those available so that it's a natural, seamless transition into these new spaces. So with that, I'm going to transfer over to the superintendent, the next couple of slides.
So we started the presentation talking about the ad hoc recommendations and the board work and the 5 directives that came from that ad hoc work. And you can see the 5 there. The check marks will indicate that administration believes this plan addresses fully. The P stands for a partial address because in some of the work, there could be additional suggestions, thoughts in terms of how to situate the corridors and in terms of programmatic offerings that the community, that the board may have further interest in us checking into. And then on the next page, the resolution actions that came from the March 18th board meeting are listed there as well. We believe that we have checked all of those areas and are able to deliver on all of those areas. There is a single P for partial in terms of there being maybe some additional considerations for redrawing boundaries. Other than that, we do believe that this plan addresses all of those recommendations. And so then on the next slide, you will see some of the outcomes and the highlights that we believe this plan allows us to do, including celebrating and honoring our neighborhoods, serving the developmental needs of all of the children, especially readdressing the middle years, elevating the services around our families and our children experiencing homelessness, aligning the humanities and social advancement of our city and what that means for young people and how they continue to contribute to our society, providing the wrap with wraparound services, starting with additional services for our students and families experiencing homelessness, but growing that out to all of our families. Many of our families are one paycheck away from being homeless, and we want to help to address those needs. We definitely want to expand career and technical education. Our community often refers to this as bring back vocational education, but with a little bit of teaching around career tech and expanding with some of the services that we currently do not offer. We believe that we can close the gap, not only in education, but also in workforce and in college. Services for our students experiencing autism, the spectrum of autism, doing a better job of addressing the needs of the families of those children, expanding extracurricular activities, aligning the north-south transportation paradigms, we believe will help us as a city in many ways, not only be able to do our core business, but to be a good neighbor and partner with the city at large. Expanding military options, more and more of our students are asking and are expressing curiosity around other branches. We currently have an Air Force Junior ROTC at Aiken High School. We want to be able to provide these opportunities at additional high schools. Increasing college access, we have pathways and partnerships that are going very well across the district, including the early college experience at Schroeder. So that gives us an opportunity to expand there. We're looking at the in-demand seats, the Montessori model right now. We've recently completed the Montessori lottery. And on the east side of town, there are a little less than 100 students that because of the lottery are not currently able to get a seat. There are a little less than 30 students on the west side. But if we are able to implement our plan, then we can provide seating for every student currently in the lottery, as well as additional students who may want to come to Cincinnati Public Schools because of our Montessori programming. Increasing the welcome centers because we've studied our MLL population and we know that it is a growing population and we have to do more things to meet their needs. Dual language opportunities through our international baccalaureate programs, expanding our school-based health centers. We have had health professionals reach out to us and want to do more with our health centers, and this will provide us an opportunity to receive those. Expanding student choice, family choice, centralizing enrollment so that we have more efficiencies in our district and getting kids started in school immediately, and then not closing any buildings. The next slide, we are continuing to build this out, but we know our board, if Rob, you wouldn't mind clicking on growth budget phase 2, working in partnership with our treasurer. If you scroll on down, some of this is completed, some we're still working through, costing out this plan for the board. You continue to scroll down, scroll to the left, to the left, to the left, and then down, and then down. You'll see our building out of the costs. Oh, sure. I don't mind at all.
So that spreadsheet that I think you all have access to now, the top portion is the reconfiguration of the grades. The second section is the programmatic cost, and then below that are construction costs. And then there's a summary page that kind of pulls it all together in a summary. So I'm gonna click on that summary tab real quick. There you go. So this is early stages. Transportation is not in there, staffing's not in there yet. But we're starting to collect all the expenses so that we can plan on how to finance it.